We all think we know the story of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. But what if I told you the next chapter of their story isn't what you'd expect at all? What if it was defined by decades of just absolute, deafening silence?
So, let's picture it, right? Adam and Eve, they've just been exiled from the garden. What happens next? I think most of us imagine they got some immediate guidance, maybe a few divine check-ins. But, well, the scriptures tell a totally different story.
From what we can piece together, it was somewhere between 50 and 60 years. That's right, decades. For more than half a century after they left paradise, Adam and Eve were left completely, utterly on their own. Can you even begin to wrap your head around that? After living in the direct presence of God, they were thrown into a world of profound, absolute silence. No visions, no guidance, just nothing. It was a time of complete spiritual isolation. The source material actually has a name for this. It calls it a state of spiritual excommunication. They were fundamentally cut off. This wasn't just God being quiet. This was a total severance from the divine connection they had always known. And you gotta think about the implications here. This silence didn't just hit Adam and Eve. It means their kids and probably even their grandkids grew up in a world where God was just a story, a distant memory their parents talked about, not a present voice. 2 whole generations, born and raised without ever hearing from the Lord. So what did they actually know for sure? Well, their world was pretty harsh. They knew for a fact they were going to die one day. They knew they had to find food, build shelter, and protect themselves. And here's the kicker. They'd forgotten where they came from, their pre-existence, and they had absolutely no clue about a plan of salvation. They were just trying to survive. And yet, life kept going. Just as this verse from Moses tells us, their children grew up, they paired off, and they started their own families. They worked the land, they tended their flocks. The human family started to grow, all under this huge, silent sky. You can just hear the children, right? Facing all the hardships of this new, tough world, turning to their parents and asking those huge questions. Questions like, why? Why is everything so hard? Why do we have to suffer? And then, of course, the big one. Why are we even here? What's the whole point of all this work and all this pain? I mean, these are the questions that have haunted people forever, and it all started right there with that first family. And what could Adam and Eve possibly say to that? The truth is, they had no answers. The source material is really clear on this. They were just as confused and lost as their own kids. They were all in the dark together. You know, this whole period teaches a really powerful and kind of tough lesson. The source highlights this quote. And it turns out, none of those first children, the ones raised in that spiritual vacuum, would later accept the gospel when it was finally revealed. It's a pretty stark reminder of how important that early foundation of faith can be. But then, after so many years of hardship and maybe even despair, something started to change. A feeling began to build up inside Adam and Eve. The text calls it an irresistible impulse to reach out, to try and break that silence. It was this desperate, hopeful leap of faith. So they did it. Just try to imagine that moment. 2 people kneeling down with absolutely no guarantee that anyone is even listening, just pouring their hearts out, hoping their prayer could somehow break through what must have felt like a sky made of stone. And then, it happened. The silence was shattered. As we read in Moses chapter 5, their prayer was literally interrupted by the voice of the Lord. They had been heard. The heavens weren't made of stone after all. Now, getting an answer was obviously incredible, but the source material argues that the real win, the great moral victory, was just in the act of praying. To choose hope after decades of silent despair, that right there was a huge achievement. So, God speaks. The long, long wait is finally over. And what's the very first thing he asks them to do after all this time? You'd probably expect something comforting, maybe some clarification. But what they got was really strange. He commands them to build an altar, take the first and best of their flock, kill it, and then burn it as an offering. I mean, it's stark. It seems totally senseless, and he gave them zero explanation for it. Now, put yourself in their shoes for a second. They had to be asking themselves these exact questions. What could this possibly achieve? Why would God want them to kill an innocent animal? It just didn't make any sense. And that's the absolute key here. The Lord offered no reason, nothing. And no matter how much they thought about it, Adam and Eve couldn't come up with one either. There was just no human logic that could explain this command. And this, right here, was the heart of their test. Our human logic, our reason, it rebels against things that are incomprehensible. It just does. But a divine commandment, as they were about to find out, sometimes demands obedience, especially when you don't understand it. This single line from Moses chapter 5 is really the climax of the whole story. Despite the confusion, despite the lack of any good reason, despite everything, Adam obeyed. It's just an incredible, powerful moment of pure faith. And this all boils down to the core takeaway from the source material. This is the whole point. The great lesson of mortality is that obedience to God's commands is its own reason. If He commands it and you obey it, you will always be in the right, even if you have no idea why. It's a theme you see again and again in the scriptures, isn't it? What seems like foolishness, or maybe even cruelty, from our limited human point of view, is often part of a divine wisdom that's playing on a whole different level. Adam's test was to trust that wisdom, even when it felt like nonsense. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. What is the greater trial of our faith? Is it enduring decades of crushing silence, where you start to wonder if anyone is even listening? Or is it finally hearing a voice, but being commanded to do something that defies all logic? It's a powerful question that really gets to the heart of what it means to believe.